Everybody here?
Hello?
We are here.
Hey. Just gonna make sure we're recording and then we'll run with it. Okay, looks good. Hey, Eric and Gmoney, thanks guys for joining. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. Excited for the talk.
Yeah, guys, glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, guys. So this is sort of our official rebranded show. We're calling it Art Unfiltered. Going to be covering a myriad of topics, everything from generative art to market talk to hanging out with good friends like we are today. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started. We're going to try to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes today sort of talking broadly about the markets and make that a thing going forward while we let some more folks file in for these first few minutes. I guess I'll start, Vaughn, with you. Did you? I know you had some stuff you wanted to shoot out to us on stage. Go
I
ahead.
just want to say, great to be here for another show. I'm glad we have our name, and really, really pleased to have both Eric and Gmoney here. Thank you very much for joining us. From my perspective, strength in the broader crypto market seemed to have a slight downward bias on NFT prices, and I would say that most of the top tier NFTs, saw slightly lower prices in terms of ETH, so with a few notable exceptions. If you were a hoodie crypto punk, you seem to have quite a strong bid to your market last week when we saw numerous hoodie punks trading last month, which I thought was interesting. And then, of course, the Artblocks drop from a couple of weeks ago, The Harvest by Per Christian Stovlin, also really seemed to catch quite a bid last week, more or less doubling in price. But outside of that, it did seem like there was a lot of, and the checks market, but we won't talk about that. But outside of that, definitely a slightly lower bias in prices and not a lot of volume from my perspective. Just kind of curious what you guys think. When you see higher ETH prices, I like to think in ETH. I think that pretty much most of us should like to think in ETH, but I do think that markets tend to be a little bit softer when we see a move up like we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And just want to maybe see what my co-hosts and our guests might think about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that when we see ETH in particular, moving up, people are often rotating in and out, especially if they don't have long-term conviction towards a specific market or specific collections within the generative art market, or even adjacently to PFPs and AI and all the other sort of markets within this space. So I think we'll continue to see that. It does surprise me at times how quickly people are willing to rotate out and how much ETH prices compress just with a 20, 30, 40% move up. But, that's been the case for a while now. And I suspect with time, as more people allocate to things like generative art as a form of protection against maybe some of their other crypto assets, then, maybe we'll see that change a little bit less dramatically.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, especially when you bring up a project like The Harvest. It seems to me like it's getting a lot more. It's a really strong project, I think, artistically, but it's been interesting to see a lot of people that you don't typically see collecting art blocks buying into this project specifically. And what I'm kind of curious to find out, what I don't really know, is whether those people will be here to stay for a long time, or what percentage of those people will be here to stay for a long time. We've seen it a few times with other projects in the past where it gets a lot of hype from people outside the typical ecosystem, but does it sustain? That's the real question. I'm curious to see.
The thing is that's good though. A lot of times people are going to come into a different ecosystem or check out a new project because of a specific drop, and then they're like, "Oh, this is really cool. Let me see what else this is about." So I think anytime you onboard people, regardless of where they're coming from, the potential for those people, some of those people will end up becoming bigger collectors of generative art potentially, even though they might have gotten their start here. So overall, a really big positive for the space, I think, regardless of who the buyers are, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember I read something recently, maybe a Medium article or blog post from Richard Chen from One Confirmation. He was talking a lot about the store value thesis with generative art specifically, and how that translates into people building out portfolios that are natively crypto, right? So it's sort of like you think about in the traditional space, if you're running a hedge fund or you're an investor of some kind, like how much do you allocate to something like art, right? And I think you see a lot of that at the highest levels. I mean, do you guys think that we'll see some of that translate into like people that are building out natively crypto portfolios?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I think that as the broader crypto ecosystem expands, what through higher prices, more people come into the space, you're going to see allocations that even at higher prices, it's almost like as the universe of crypto assets is expanding, obviously NFTs can get a disproportional share of it because it's so small relative to the overall crypto market. I mean, I remember when crypto punks were around one ETH and ETH was $500, there was a lot of speculation about, oh, if ETH goes to $2,000, what's going to happen to crypto punks? And the general consensus was the price was going to fall in ETH. And what ended up happening is that massive expansion of ETH going from 500 to 2,000 and beyond. It ultimately brought more people into the space, and some of those people came into buy CryptoPunks. And instead of seeing the price of CryptoPunks fall from one ETH to 0.25 ETH, and when they went from one ETH to 25 ETH. So, I think that I think in the short term, when you see the move up in Ethereum prices, the natural response, especially from the marginal seller, would be to say, okay, well, I just got 20% more on my ETH. I think I'm going to just cut my price a little and sell. But ultimately, when you see the bigger move that starts pulling in, almost like the gravitational mass starts pulling more people into it as prices rise, yes, you will see money being allocated to sectors that we're playing in, Gen Art being one of them for sure. And I do think we can sustain higher prices even in a higher ETH market for that reason.
Yeah, it's funny, and to kind of to build on what Vaughn just said is like I remember when the price when I was entering the CryptoPunks market and ETH was around 500, 550, and there was always that talk of like if ETH were to go up, what happens to the price of punks and all NFTs? And my thesis was, and still is, remains the same, is that yeah, in the short term you'll probably see a little bit of weakness, but I do think overall, like if you're bullish on crypto in general, then you're going to be bullish on assets priced in crypto. So in terms of like when the stock market is at all-time highs, real estate, luxury cars, wine, cigars, watches, all these things are at all-time highs as well. And I think you see the same thing will happen. It did happen in crypto, right? That was like my thesis with NFTs and why like I got into the things that I did, because my thesis was that the wealth effect, and people would want to get like digitally native, crypto native assets. And I think we're gonna see the same thing play out, where maybe in the short term you'll see a little bit of weakness, but I think ultimately, what's good for crypto would ultimately be good for NFTs as well.
So is it fair to say that the cheat code is quite literally to denominate in US dollars, right? Because I mean, obviously, like I denominate in ETH. I think that's the case for a lot of people in this space. But in markets like they're like what's happening right now, it seems to be like you've definitely got an advantage if you're denominating in dollars, right?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think G and myself are both saying the opposite. That only in the short term that's the case, and then once you start seeing the bigger move, then you see prices go up because people are coming into the space. I mean, look, I I think all of us or most of us here probably agree that the crypto markets and digital assets have a very bright future, and I think that there's going to be a lot of millionaires and potentially billionaires minted over the next decade. And I have talked about this a little bit before, but just like people in the real world, like what G Money was saying, cars and watches and all these luxury goods are being bought are at all time highs when the stock market's at all time highs. As crypto prices are going higher and higher, people are making more money. They want to diversify their assets and they're going to own top tier NFTs. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Just like rich people in the traditional finance world go out and buy art and fancy cars and use these different asset classes to diversify their portfolio in fiat. I think crypto millionaires are going to obviously do the same thing. So I think bright future down the line, but in the short term, I think we can all agree that higher ETH prices are going to put a little bit of downward pressure in the short term. But if you're focused on the long term, those really should be your opportunities to get involved.
Yeah, G, I wonder. I had a question for you, and I guess to Vaughn and as well. But like, being around as long as you have, what's an example of arguably the biggest mistake that you think a collector makes in this space? And I want to stay away from like the obvious things like like FOMOing too quickly and just going crazy and being emotionally irrational, but like sort of like more micro and specific, if you have any.
Um, Look, I have a lot of friends that come into the crypto space and they ask me what to buy. And I say, well, you should buy a CryptoPunk. Oh, I don't want to spend 60 on a CryptoPunk. And they end up taking, over the course of 2 months, they end up taking the equivalent of 60 ETH and they buy a bunch of crap projects. And then they don't understand why 50% of what they bought went to zero and the other 50% went to 50%. And they're all then saying, oh, I wish I had bought the CryptoPunk. It's like, if you're going to come into the space, and I trust me, I get that 100,000 is a that's a lot of money for someone to start off with. But if you're ultimately going to put $100,000 into it, don't in my opinion, I don't think it makes sense to try to pick 20 projects that you put 5,000 into. I think that's a losing recipe. That the blue chips and top tier assets are blue chip and top tier for a reason. And ultimately, even if you do well in your other investments, you're going to want those assets eventually anyway. So I would always say to people, no matter what you're collecting, whether it's NFTs or any type of collectible, buy the highest quality and best thing that you can buy, and you're probably better off buying one thing that's really, really good versus 20 things that are kind of average.
Or you could buy 5 squiggles.
Okay, yeah.
People still like those things or what? That's crazy. Matt, did you have another comment on it? I'm going to throw a question in Eric before he leaves.
No, I think it's probably good to like kind of start, opening up the floor for focus on both guests here. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Eric, I want to thanks for coming. First of all, man, I know there's like a ton of things to talk about, and we probably won't get to all of them. But one thing that I'm really curious about is like I don't know that there's a person that spends more time of their lives, trying to onboard and teach people about generative art and about this space, and there's arguably nobody better suited to talk about the ebbs and flows of that process. So I wonder. Like what have been the biggest difficulties throughout that process? You've been doing it for several years now. And what are the things today that excite you the most?
Oh man, there's a lot there. First of all, thanks again for having me. Let me come on here. I'm actually going for a walk while I'm on this, so I can get a little bit of exercise in too. So a couple of things. First of all, a little bit to what y'all had said before. I'm all about cryptocurrency being the medium of exchange for all of this type of art, but a little bit more towards this question, I do think that the onboarding process is just like when you're asking someone to invest in generative art because you're excited about it and you share your passions about it, you're actually asking them to invest in two different things, which is both this blockchain technology, which in my opinion over time should not even be part of the conversation. It should just be inherently how we're operating, and we're just going to assume that everything is this technology if it has value, if it's a digitally native good and it has value. But I worry a little bit about this idea. Like, I don't know. I don't think this would happen anytime soon. Not even, for sure not in the next 2 or 3 years. But I do worry about this idea that if it has to be priced in ETH for it to be successful as a digitally native good, that you are just kind of inherently leaving a lot of people out of the conversation. And so I have no interest in releasing a project in USDC now. But I would like to see a project in the future where somebody's only making one investment decision, not two. They're investing in a person, an art form, a medium, but not also in like this underlying technology. And I'm hugely bullish on Ethereum and a big maximalist, and really grateful that I'm not using my credit card to make purchases. But I do think that there's a huge window to onboard people by enabling them to operate within the ecosystem without having to make two bets. And one of those is credit card and or USDC, where they are making a decision to purchase something that is one-to-one, and then the rest of the decisions are based on what they're interested in and what they want to do. I know that's controversial though, and I don't know that that's necessarily going to be something that's going to change anytime soon. Like the fluidity and the ease of operating once you are within the ETH ecosystem is just so beautiful not to have to deal with USDC. Beyond that, the shift there's been a pretty massive shift, and I've mentioned this in a bunch of different conversations in the past, where I think that there's a huge difference between 2021 and even parts of 2022, where the content took a back seat to the technology. Like it was all about, oh my gosh, did you hear these NFTs went up in value? even if you cared about that NFT, to the person you were talking to, they didn't know what a rainbow colorful squiggle was. So like you would generally have to speak about this thing as as kind of a anonymous, like an unnamed thing. And then over time, as the NFT in and of itself, just for the purpose of the NFT in and of itself, has failed to just capture as much value as what the content is that's inside, we're seeing a pretty broad shift, or at least I'm seeing a pretty broad shift. And I'll give you an example. I'd say that when I was at NADA in Miami, and I was just there for 2 hours, and I had a chance to speak to just kind of the people casually strolling up. And I'd say that over 50% of the people I spoke to were women over the age of 70 that knew what a chromie squiggle was. And to me, that's pretty significant. So the conversation shifts from all the speculation to their number one concern is, how do I stay safe? How do I make sure that I don't get scammed? And the reality is that within the traditional art world, people don't flip their shit every 7 days. And so it's really easy to stay safe in the crypto space if your intention is not to be able to act quickly on the assets that you have in your wallet. And so being able to like have that conversation has been very disarming for a lot of the people that are interested in getting into the space. I mentioned this a couple of times previously as well, that I've gifted a couple squiggles to actually daughters of some of the artists that I look up to more than anyone else in the world. And, I didn't ask them to get MetaMask. I literally just printed a seed phrase. I watercolored a squiggle, which I'm not a good watercolorer, but I do like the results sometimes. And I stuck the seed phrase into it, and I shipped them a framed squiggle. And that really seems to resonate with people that are expressing some trepidation of entering into space. And I don't see a lot of action being taken there. It's something that if I had more bandwidth, I would probably try to dive into more. I feel like there's a lot of research that can be done in this consumer behavior, but ultimately these people they don't know what OpenSea is. So they have no interest in selling their NFT, or at least maybe until I do something that pisses them off. And in the meantime, they just have this thing in their living room. They know that they own a squiggle. They're a participant in this space. They can talk about it. They can share. They can get the eye rolls from their friends. They can get their friends that are curious or even collectors to have like an active conversation. And the level of risk, which seems to be the biggest barrier to entry for a lot of people, is completely eliminated. I mean, if your house burns down and you have a bunch of Rothkos in it, the last thing you're going to worry about is your chromie squiggle frame. For the time being. So yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on onboarding, but like overall, it seems like there's a disarming nature of letting people participate in the content, in the artist's career, in the medium as it's expanding, without having to participate so deeply into the actual cryptocurrency component of it. And I'd like to see a little bit more happening in that direction, where there's more opportunities for people to participate as just collectors that we are. Man, I'm out of breath. Sorry.
That's cool. Gee, I mean, you've got to have a lot of experience doing the same things. I'm curious, does your history with this echo Eric's, or do you have a slightly different view, or like what are folks kind of saying?
In terms of onboarding people, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Just what those conversations are like, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the gamut, right? Because I think that you have the crypto natives, right? But then as you think about how do you onboard the next 100 million people, these are conversations that we need to have and we need to figure out. And to exactly what Snow said, right? In terms of like in the traditional art world, people aren't, flipping things every like 20 minutes, right? So it's like, it's just like kind of like a different, let's say, target market, right? In terms of like broadening that scope and like making it easier, like just with the stuff that I'm working on, I know that I'm trying to make it as easy as possible to like onboard people into crypto without them even realizing, right? It's like, how do you make it so that it's like, oh, if you see something you like, you can buy it and you're not necessarily worried about, oh, like what's going to be my ROI in the next 30 days? Because like in reality, most people don't operate like that, right? Like when you're collecting anything, people usually aren't like flipping things for like immediate flips and stuff like that. So I think it's just kind of like a different target demo, which is fine, right? You're gonna have like your degens all like us, and then varying degrees all the way to like super vanilla. That's like, yeah, like I'm purchasing this as an investment long term, and I think that that's just like you have to be cognizant of that. The same way that there's millions of market participant types in the real world, the same thing will happen in the NFT ecosystem.
I mean, I think you're demonstrating that with 9DCC as well. You don't have to have a wallet to get the thing, and the thing sticks with. And obviously, there's a centralized component to that, which needs to be addressed, and I think over time will be addressed with IYK and all these technologies. I got a chance to chat with him about some of the stuff they have coming up, and I think it's really fun. But like, you're doing that, you're enabling someone to come and purchase something. And granted, it's not necessarily capital A art; it's apparel, it's fashion. But those things are going to be on ramps, just like everything else is an on ramp. Like, we just happen to have it created by luck, because that definitely wasn't what I was intending to do, like this on-ramp for people that are really interested in digital art and interested in blockchain to be able to participate in something more meaningful than a typical flip. And being completely conscious of the fact that I'd say 80% of the people in the Artblocks ecosystem that are diehard collectors today started to flip. Like, they came here to flip and then discovered that there's something a little bit more meaningful, or significantly more meaningful. I missed the Richard Chen article that you mentioned, but I did catch Derek's article this morning, and I thought that was like incredibly powerful to demonstrate not just like what we're doing right now, but to demonstrate what this means in the future. And I'm just really excited. I think that there's just a lot more there. I don't think we spend enough time thinking about if it is a long-term store of value. Like, one of the things that people like about gold is they can just go get gold and they can stick an ingot in their safe if they want to. Like, there's no strings attached to that. And I think there's an opportunity to maybe take some of the strings attached from the art and put them and let people concentrate more on the content and like kind of the future of it.
Yeah, and to echo what Snowfro just said, if you can, I'd love it if you could pin Derek's thread from this morning, because I read that last week when he was like kind of like drafting it, and I think it is really good and puts like the entire concept and the framework. Like, he's very eloquent about it. So I think that's really cool. So I highly encourage people to read that. But to Eric's point is, like, I do think that we're just trying to bring people on through different ways, right? And so it's like, through Artblocks, people have been able to come in and like find a real love for generative art. And I'm hoping on like the 9DCC side that people are like intrigued, and maybe they're like, oh, what's more to this blockchain tech, and like what else can we do with it? Because like, oh, maybe they enter through a shirt, and like either they're speculating or they're wearing it because they like it, but then they end up kind of getting Trojan horse into the system and really going down the rabbit hole, which is, I think, ultimately what happens with like all new technologies.
Yeah, and that's something I'm kind of curious to see play out more over time. Is you're exploring it with the fashion vertical, and I think there's definitely a lot of parallels between art and fashion. But how do we, like, maybe more broadly? I think at the core we're using the Artblocks engine, correct? So like, how do you see other applications of this potentially playing out? Like, I remember, I think Eric like floated a while ago, furniture, like generative furniture or rugs or some sort of home decor could become generative. We're seeing it with fashion, but curious to see like where else you guys are thinking about it.
Well, I'm actually building a presentation for NFT Paris in 2 weeks, and I had to kind of really think through what I was going to say, because it's one of my first times I get to do a keynote, and I've spoken a lot like solo in my previous life in the ceramic tile world, is like these continuing education credits. And one of the things that's the most important about a continuing education credit is that you're not sitting there talking about like selling your product. I feel like the early years of NFT NYC, and I haven't been for the last 2 years to the actual conference, but it was just a lot of people that just went up there and it was like a big pitch about what they do. Unfortunately, everything that I live and breathe is happening on Artblocks. So I actually have to like spend some time crafting this so that it doesn't feel like it's all about Artblocks. But in reality, what we're doing with Engine is establishing a gamut between kind of on the very, very, very ephemeral side, like a receipt, where you mint something and it's unique, and that receipt enables you to manufacture something that's unique to you. And it's not meant to be scarce necessarily. It's just meant to be your proof of ownership. And if you want to use that as a PFP, that's great. If you lose your hat, you can come back and get another hat. If I've talked about this IKEA poster thing for a long time, where, you go to IKEA and everybody has the same theme artwork in their college dorm room, but it's not exactly the same piece. And if you move, you can print it again. If you become attached to the fact that yours is unique for XYZ reasons, you can print it again. So I think there's an opportunity for it to be everything from that. And then on the far end of the spectrum is the ability to kind of create these stores of value for what I consider to be the most blockchain native type of art, which now we talk about like the fine art side of this, which is actually what Artblocks has spent most of its time doing. So in between there, you have souvenirs, and then you have design. And if you notice, like a long time ago, the Artblocks website, it didn't say generative art, it said generative content stored on the Ethereum blockchain. And that's because in my previous life, I spent a lot of time in the design world, and a lot of the ideas of what Artblocks is today came from this concept that people don't want the same thing over and over. Everything from something as like nuanced as a ceramic tile comes with veins that look like marble, and every 10 tiles it's the same vein. And maybe most people don't pick up on that, but really high-end people building really high-end houses would say, no, I don't want any repetition for 200 pieces, 500 pieces. And as the factories kept coming out with like higher resolution tile, we'd be sitting there thinking, well, I don't need a higher resolution tile. The resolution is just fine. I just don't want to see repetition in my tile. And so there's, I think, this idea that there is a world where individualistic outputs can actually have a home well beyond just fine art. Fine art works really well with screens, even with printing. But once you get into that, you start establishing a significantly higher level of friction, as G can attest to with what we did in Miami. It gets exponentially harder to create individual things that are physically manufactured. But if a manufacturer starts changing their research and development budget, and instead of like spending all their time trying to make screens a higher resolution or tile a higher resolution, things that eventually the human eye can no longer perceive the differences in resolution, and instead they start focusing their R&D efforts into, okay, how can I streamline manufacturing processes so that every single thing that I make can be unique? And in a world where it costs the same amount of money to make 1 million things that are identical as it costs to make 1 million things that are all unique, I feel very strongly that humans will generally tend to the thing that's unique to them. Not unique like 2 different collections on Artblocks. I mean unique within the same collection of Artblocks, so that you can identify with a specific group or with a specific project or a specific aesthetic, that you know, oh yeah, that guy has the same collection poster that I do, but it's a different output. I think that, to me, it just feels like it's impossible that the world will not gravitate more towards that, especially being able to kind of learn from the product market fit of what has happened on Artblocks with like what wasn't originally intended to be like fine art collected by major art institutions, but has turned into that and has demonstrated this kind of distribution mechanism that didn't really exist before.
Eric, I have a question for you. Really relates to decentralization and it kind of taking a step back. We were talking about onboarding people, and you were talking about bringing people into the system, and some of the stuff you were saying. I've onboarded quite a few people, and I always insist on doing it, correctly with hardware wallets and all the proper procedures. But I guess the thing is, I agree with you. It's very complex. If we want to onboard 100 million people or 1 billion people, whatever the number is, I mean, we're probably going to have to compromise on some of our purist thoughts and from a decentralization standpoint. So the question is, how much centralization risk how much centralization are we willing to introduce into the system in order to ease the transitional process? Or in your mind, do we have to compromise on the decentralization aspect of it?
I honestly don't think that we have to compromise, but it really matters on a timeline. Like the protection of your NFTs is totally directly correlated to the timeline in which you plan on taking an action on that NFT. I was on a call earlier with Matt talking about what we're doing in Paris, and Ledger is hosting this really nice event, and I love everything Ledger's done. Like we let Ledger into our Venus over Manhattan exhibition spaces, because why the hell would people not secure their stuff or learn about securing their stuff as they're exploring an NFT that has a $20,000 floor? But like, then you talk about my personal security with NFTs, and where I have all my punks and glyphs and meebits and all of my Artblocks pieces, there's no need for a ledger or a hardware wallet. It's literally a matter of a procedure to secure your NFTs in a way that you're comfortable with. And so for me, the most important thing was making sure that those things did not live in my home, because I just don't want access to them. I don't want them to be anywhere near me or my family. And so it takes me 2 weeks to collect my seed phrase in order to put everything together so I can claim a damn friendship bracelet, which I did that for significance perspective, not because I needed the more NFTs or more Artblocks pieces. And so to me, I think there's it's a time correlation. And so in that shorter time span, when the people do need to flip, because that's how they dip their toes in the water, and honestly, it's just a ton of fun. I don't know that centralization is a problem, because it's just like when you put money into a bank, or it's when maybe not a bank because it's a little bit more regulated, but there's many times in your life where you put something into something without having full guarantees that you're going to be able to get it back. And usually you do that for shorter time horizons. So the hardware wallet is kind of like an in-between between an active hot wallet and a shorter time and then a longer time horizon, kind of like where I have my NFT stored. And while I don't personally use any kind of centralized custodial service, just because I feel like I'm a power user, I guess, in the world of crypto, I don't know that I have a problem with people using centralized systems as long as they don't leave their stuff in there, as long as it's only in there for the same amount of time that you would leave something in a hot wallet. I think the reality there is that it's the escape from that centralized system that people don't understand when the time is right, or they get set in their ways, or they get used to it, or they get so busy trading and flipping NFTs that they don't think about the centralized nature of the space that they're in. But if you really kind of take a step back and think, there's really not much harm. If you really were going to go, for example, thank God this didn't happen, but FTX was going to launch a centralized trading platform. If you deposit your NFTs into that, just like in Bittrex, you deposit your tokens into that because you want instantaneous database-backed transactions. The idea there is that then you take it out of there, when it has value, whether you take cash into the bank or whether you put it into a hardware wallet or into like a seed phrase-based paper storage. And I think that's just really what it comes out to. If you have a really short timeline, then centralized is good, but centralized probably needs to go out of their way to help people exit. And that's not necessarily in the best interest of a centralized organization to encourage people to stop using their services. But ideally, if people are practical about it, they can enter and exit a centralized system. And yeah, there's still a risk during that time, but it's really the people that got screwed with FTX are people that just kept their stuff on there for prolonged periods of time without any expectation to remove it.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, obviously you're bringing up points that we all need to subscribe to, is segregating assets and making sure most of your assets are protected. I think a lot of people like having their access to their assets in the short term to be able to take advantage of the short-term market fluctuations and trades and flips and stuff like that. But one of the points that you made that I think we all should really make a real effort to, with everyone in the space, is to take your asset security way more important, put it on a very, very high level, because lots of people lost money at FTX. Lots of people keep crypto punks in hot wallets. I mean, I don't know how it's possible for someone to do that, but people do it all the time. So I appreciate you bringing that up, for one thing, and also your good answer.
I remain very confident in saying that printing, maybe etching onto a steel plate just for extra security, but putting it into the frame of a physical print, or even, gosh, like if Samsung, the frames had a little slot to slide like a steel plate that was engraved in it. Like if somebody was going to break into your house to steal a bunch of art, sure, maybe they could grab that. They could also grab a Rothko or a Pollock or whatever off the wall and steal that. And that probably is, just as valuable or more valuable than a lot of the crazy NFTs that are in our space. The security implications of having your stuff off of the network cannot be beat. And it just ties you into the realm of understanding normal everyday risk in operating, having a car that could get stolen, or a painting that can get stolen, or somebody breaks into your safe and takes a diamond ring. That has not been solved for humanity on how to keep things secure from theft in that way. But it's almost like as an industry have basically said, here is all my stuff. I walk around with it all the time. I carry it with it. It's 2 clicks away on my computer, and our most valuable things are easier to access than like breaking into your car. And I think that's where I think that there's an opportunity to kind of change the way that people consider security. It's like I would love to do a full drop where the drop entirely comes with a print, and the print has the seed phrase on the back of it. And look, if you want to go secure it, great. If you go take that super secure thing and put it into a hot wallet, man, I mean, hopefully there's good instructions in there for you not to do that. But it feels pretty easy to me that would be a great way to onboard people that are not currently participating in the ecosystem, which, the more people, the better. The less we feel like an echo chamber, the better. There's some really beautiful announcements that are going to be coming out over the next few weeks or months about institutional collecting. And, that's what we need. We need more eyes on this, but we don't need more eyes on this because something sold for X millions of dollars. We need more eyes on this because somebody cares about what we're doing for the content outside of our ecosystem. It adds value to every single person that's currently in the ecosystem, and really supports the pieces that have gained respect and notoriety over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I wonder, is that really the biggest issue, right? We all want to see more participation and new folks coming in and frankly having as much fun as we did when we first hit the mint button, right? I mean, that's the whole point. That's the whole reason I got into this space, and I think a lot of other people did as well. So it's just is it really the biggest problem from a security angle, or is it more of an issue of people just don't understand generative art and algorithmic art and stuff like that? I mean, in my estimation, it's much more of the former than the latter. Like Eric and G, I know you guys have talked to a bunch of people and explained this issue to through the gamut, right? And so curious where you guys land on that spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think especially when you're bridging both worlds, there's a little misunderstanding from each side, right? And I'm going to use the collab that Snowfro and I just did as an example where, I kind of feel like from the outside, if you're not in the crypto space, you understand a t-shirt, right? You're oh yeah, this is a t-shirt and there's an NFT that's unique to that t-shirt and that is linked to that t-shirt. And conceptually that makes sense. But I think from the NFT side is it's not a purely digital collectible, right? There's a physical component to it. And I think it's a learning process. And I think you're going to have different degrees of understanding, right? And I think that just takes time and is education. So although I think part of it is definitely security and getting people comfortable so that they, it's not where it's oh, I click on one random button and all my NFTs disappear, but also it's education of pushing boundaries. And I know because this is stuff that Snowfro and I talk about a lot. Most of our conversations are discussed around this of trying to bring in other and new players, not to necessarily pump our bags, but it's because everybody is on a different plane of understanding, right? And so what might make the concept click for you won't necessarily make it click for everybody, right? And I think it's just a combination of education and educating about safety as well.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is if you steal a Rothko off someone's wall, I wish you the best of luck trying to sell that and navigating the secondary market. Whereas with an NFT, you can just take the highest available WETH offer on that piece. I guess OpenSea actually just made an announcement yesterday where they're locking up suspicious NFTs for 3 hours. But I think that's a key difference, and it's kind of intimidating for a lot of people when I talk to them about there's guardrails in place with traditional art. You can't just steal a Rothko and sell it. You can do that with an NFT though, and that's kind of something that intimidates people as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the Rothko thing at all right there. I would say that generally the people that would lose a Rothko may not get it back. Whether it's easier for the person buying it or stealing it to capitalize on it, I totally agree. The NFT ecosystem enables that. But I guess another thing that I'd like to say is that we are here. We are so deep into all these things that we're spending our time on, and we're all very excited about it. And there's a very big difference of getting new people to enter because we want to pump our bags or because we want them to buy our NFTs. There's another very big difference. There's another way of doing this, which is you're doing this because, damn it, I'm having such a fucking good time. I just can't imagine people that I think are open-minded not thoroughly enjoying this process, at least what I've experienced for the last 5 years, which has had ups and downs. So it's not all upside. And so there's also not a huge rush here. And I think that sometimes the more value assigned to these NFTs, the more detrimental it is for these processes that we have of outreach and ongoing stuff. I'll give you an example. The friendship bracelets, like my goal was to buy like hundreds of them at 0.05 ETH just so I could have this like massive collection. I did not expect them to get to where they got in price. I didn't want them to get to where they got in price, right? The whole point is that this is huge edition, one of the largest NFT collections that's ever been released. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, like supply of 75,000, people will clearly keep the price down. And when you keep the price down, like if I can buy it for $50, I can gift it for $50. I can't go around giving everybody $600 gifts, but I can very easily, and I've done this in the past, give $50 gifts. So the reason that I wanted the price to be low is so that I can spread the word a little bit. We seem to, obviously, like it's fun for the people in the space, so obviously that's why, you know, the values of those things go up, but there's no rush. Like a lot of the people that are participating in this space right now that are friends of mine were gifted a crypto that cost me $20. Their on-ramp into this was very different. Obviously there was a big upside for them because they didn't pay anything for it, but the conversations were very, very much more interesting and exciting in 2018 and 2019 about CryptoPunks before they hit the $200 mark. That because they weren't all about money. It was about technology. It was about like the passion for generative art. It was about like the beauty of like this distribution mechanism. And so I think if we're conscientious of the fact that like there's no rush. Like we need people to be able to enter into the space, not get sucked into or dragged into the space against their own will. Those people are going to be the more meaningful long-term holders. And like I said earlier, people entered into the crypto space maybe for trading stocks or for trading crypto and then flipping art. But those people found a home with generative art, with Artblocks or FX Hash. They found a home there. And that transformation from flipper to art appreciator is priceless. And so how do we get people to have that experience again? Like that's one of the things I spend the most amount of time thinking about. How do we get people to have the early Artblocks experience, the early FX Hash experience, the early CryptoPunks experience? Because that is disarming. People were not there necessarily because they thought they were going to like 1,000x. They were there because they were deep into the excitement and the rabbit hole of what this technology means. And it continues to be exciting for me as someone that's been now, I guess I'm approaching my 7th year since claiming CryptoPunks. Like all of the things that have happened have not changed just like this deep excitement and appreciation and enthusiasm for the beauty of this technology. And if we can get through and help people understand the beauty of this without the financialization, I think we have a much easier time. The financialization draws in big money, which makes a lot of sense too. I don't know where Artblocks would be today in terms of like, you know, museums and all that kind of stuff if it wasn't for some of the early investments of some of the funds like the 3ACs and all the other like awesome art collecting venture funds that are out there. Like Artblocks may not be in the same place that it's at. So that's fine, but 99% of people don't have that kind of fund or have that kind of access to capital. But those 99% of people are going to be able to find a home here that's like full of, you know, the same excitement that we found it when we first entered the space. And I'd love to kind of concentrate on finding ways to do that. I think that 90C is doing a fantastic job of that. And some of our engine partners that we're kind of exploring right now, I think are going to do the same. So, you know, always looking for that next we're still early moment to me is invaluable. And I encourage everybody else to be doing the same. And also as you speak to people, you know, find that like we're still early vibe. Because to me, Derek's article, you know, I retweeted today, like it just screams we're still early all over it. And that is a vibe that people are excited to enter because they don't feel like they've already like been outpriced or been left out of the market. And there's always going to be the next ringers and the next Fidenza and those big pieces. And when people stumble into them because of the love and appreciation for the content versus, you know, like purely speculative reasons, it's a good feeling. You can't take that back. They keep that forever. And, you know, I think, yeah, trying to find that for people is meaningful and something that we could probably focus some of our efforts towards.
It's funny you mentioned that about friendship bracelets. I was planning to give one to my sister as a Christmas present, but then like the price action like made me think twice about it. And I know that was originally your intent. But I actually ended up doing something more meaningful where we actually like sat down together and shopped for art that truly resonated with her. You know, obviously I think that was like a more meaningful experience, but it's funny how you mentioned like friendship bracelets and how that and that price action goes into like how you're thinking about it.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm incredibly proud of what's happened with friendship bracelets. It has demonstrated something I've been thinking about for a really long time, but it demonstrated it much faster than I thought it would, and much like just more intensely than I thought it would. And it's like friendship bracelets. I said that even when we announced it. It's another way of letting people feel like they're still early in this process, like that they belong. Somebody could have bought a $25 NFT off the floor of Artblocks and been able to participate in that, or be gifted one. And so I'm really proud of what happened with it. This is maybe going to make people cringe, but like I am on a mission to find a way to release high quantity NFT artwork that has value, not because of scarcity. And that's so hard. I feel like, to me, that's the thing that we have to crack to get to a point of mainstream adoption. We have to crack this thing about scarcity, because, said this before, like iPhone, when they run out of phones, they go make more phones. Like most companies in the world, when they sell out of the thing that they make, they go and make more. That doesn't necessarily suit the luxury brand lifestyle, and there's a perfect niche cut out for that. But just consider that the majority of the world operates outside of that. So whoever cracks the puzzle here, whoever figures out the puzzle of the NFT that does not have to have utility or financialization for people to want to consume it, and does not have to have scarcity on top of that, is going to be in a really good spot. So again, we've talked about friendship bracelets maybe being an L2 project in the future where there is no scarcity, and obviously there'd be differentiations to keep the value of like the OG L1s in place. But the idea here is that this thing is like meant to be trivial but interesting, compelling, inspire curiosity, give people delight. The idea that somebody would walk by a Claire's store, if y'all don't know what that is, it's a little girl's like fashion store with jewelry. I don't know it might just be for adults too. I don't know. But I always walked by them growing up, and there's just like candy in there, colorful bracelets and stuff. And I'm just thinking, like, is there a world where somebody just walks up to one of those stores and pays $10 for this thing, and back to the receipt concept, prints out a receipt, you have a little piece of artwork, it puts a piece of artwork in your wallet, and all of a sudden you have a bracelet in your hand. And I think, there's more to be explored and more to be discovered here. Open editions are starting to kind of scratch that itch a little bit, but they miss the individuality component, which I think is just so important. At least for me, at least in the thesis that I'm trying to build out for Artblocks. So, we'll see. I don't expect it to happen in the next year or two, but I would like to continue to release projects that have this less scarcity-based demand and more intrinsic value-based demand. And that'll, I think, help support everything else that's in the ecosystem that does have, intrinsic value and financial value and scarcity value. But I don't know. It goes back to onboarding. We can all do a better job as platforms to support onboarding in the space.
Eric, it's super weird you were talking about the Claire's analogy, because I had this thought. I don't know if you remember the holographic squiggle that we saw, the digital in Miami, and was it 2020 or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking, like, man, it'd be cool if, like, friendship bracelets, and I don't know where the technology is in this. I might be talking out of my what, but it would be cool if you had like a bracelet that could be enabled holographically, and like you had the corresponding NFT to it, right? So you walk around, and it's almost like this like a Ready Player One environment where you can just like enable it, and it's like it's like a literal like friendship bracelet like on your arm. It's kind of cool.
With the animation and everything, that'd be pretty wild.
Yeah, pretty awesome, right?
The future is near, guys. The future is near. In the meantime, I'd be pretty happy with a machine that literally you mint a bracelet and it feeds out the string, and a robot grabs the end, twists it, folds it, twists it, ties it, and literally puts it on your wrist. And that does not feel that far away. I mean, I feel like maybe for $100,000 worth of like research and development, you could probably put a machine like that together. And that experience, I think, would be so compelling. Like, I think about the kiosks and shopping malls. Like, I grew up with those things just rotating out all the time, and it was always just some kind of knickknack. Some of them would stay. Some of them turned into massive operations like Build-A-Bear. But, it's like that kind of, you didn't go to the shopping mall to see what's at the kiosks, rarely. But, like, you walked by and inspired curiosity. It was always some kind of thing that caught your attention. I think that's a state that we're currently in crypto, in like generative art, and especially generative manufacturing concepts. Like, we are in the kiosk stage. We need to inspire delight and curiosity out of people walking by and say, hey, I want to kind of play there. And once they do, it's just like the world opens up to all this madness that's happening in our ecosystem. But the on-ramp wasn't word of mouth, someone being like, oh yeah, you can make a bunch of money on this. Not that there's anything wrong with that either. I mean, shit, I definitely was very guilty of that in 2017 with all the shit coins that I participated in. But I think the delight and the curiosity is what's going to draw the mainstream to want to participate in this, and not feeling like they have to flip to be successful, I think, is part of that as well.
We should have another episode where we talk to you about master nodes and ICOs. That should be a good episode.
Yo, I probably had like 95 different master nodes on at any time. Yo, I had like 25 Pivx nodes and like 9 Mu nodes. Oh man, poor Pixel Pete really had to hear all of that.
G, I remember when I think I was with Vaughn. I think Vaughn, I was with you and Eric and a few other people when we came to Miami, and we were at the NDCC space, and that was super fun because it gets into this conversation about pairing experience with being a collector in the space and how much stickiness that has. And I mean, we definitely saw a lot of that. I remember when I went up and I paid for one, I was watching it come out, I'm like, this is super cool, right? We see the reveal, we've got the folks in the back printing them. It's like a 15-20 minute process between payment and like receipt, and you've got the physical good, the NFT, the whole thing. And I wonder, like, going forward, is that going to become more of a sort of standard for collectors and collections at large, and how much does that help onboarding?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that when Snowfro and I were talking about this, it was kind of like, in the not too distant future, what does this world look like, right? Where you get a one of X, right? Where instead of going for mass production, people are going for mass customization, and that's exactly. And we spent so much time talking about this, of like, the digital side of the tech is way ahead of like the production side, right? And it's kind of like, what do these manufacturing processes start to look like, start to change, and then how does that affect like the end state with the consumer? Where ultimately I think that's where we're headed, because I think humans as individuals, we like to be unique, right? Like, we like to be part of something, but we also want to be unique. And so I think that's one. We've seen how incredibly important and strong that meme is in a totally digital world. And now the question is, how do we bring that out into the real world? Because I really do think like stuff like that, when people experience things, because I mean, I think everybody in this room has probably had this conversation where people are like, I don't get NFTs, they're stupid. And then, my conversations that I have with them is like, oh, like everything in the real world is an NFT, you just don't call it an NFT. And then I start giving them examples, and they're like, oh, okay, that starts to make a little more sense. So it's really just kind of like getting people used to the concept, helping them understand that they already know the concept. And now then it's like, all right, and then look what's possible with it, right? That wasn't possible before. Like, you couldn't do this before, and have like digital ownership over a certain digital asset.
This is just kind of the last point. Like, there is friction in manufacturing, but there's not nearly as much friction in, for example, what Bright Moments is doing with in-person minting, which has captivated at least my heart in terms of like having that experience. And then if you take it a little bit step further of friction, like if everybody in the world had an AxiDraw plotter, then we get to a point where there's a lot less friction for something like plottables to be able to demonstrate that like beauty of being able to create your own artwork to the same specifications of the artist. And in Marfa, we had plottables with a Stevie P drop with instructions for defacement, which to me, I think is maybe the best conceptual artwork in the space to date. Like, it just kind of blows my mind and checks so many different boxes. But I saw a lot of people mint their first NFT with the biggest grin on their face. And that wasn't the Bright Moments in-person minting thing, although, there was some in-person minting thing there, but it was more of this, like, just this empowerment of like, okay, I have this thing and I'm watching it be done. And this is like the real physical output that it's meant to be. It just, there's so much more to explore there. And we find ourselves generally too busy to just dedicate ourselves full time to that onboarding of delight and excitement. But it's definitely on top of our mind at Artblocks consistently. And I think it's on the top of mind for many of the people that are in the ecosystem right now.
Eric, I just want to say sorry I missed you at the Velemint. I went to dinner with the missus and left before you arrived, I guess. So sorry.
I got there after it was over, but I did get to see
you?
some minted, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I got there at the very end. I had to go to a dinner before that. But yeah, sorry to miss you as well.
Nice. The question I have for my co-host as well as our guests is, and it stems from a conversation that I believe Eric and I spoke about a very long time ago, but we were talking about bots or some issues relating to bots and different types of mechanisms for drops. And I remember Eric saying, very clearly, like, I'm sick of fighting decentralization. So, but the question I want to pose and talk about is, we are seeing more issues relating to bots, and I know for some of the non-curated drops, we're starting to see some allow lists to start to potentially mitigate some of the worst effects of that. And I guess the question is, primarily for Eric, but I want to hear from our other guests and hosts, like, how we finally gotten to the point where the downside, the downside of slightly reducing or fighting decentralization through allow lists may have come to a point where it makes sense to help mitigate some of the effects, the negative effects that we're seeing relating to bots.
This is a very deep conversation. I'm just going to say one thing real quick. I don't know that it makes sense either still. And I do think that what's important is listening to the community, being open-minded, being willing to experiment. I don't feel comfortable saying that Artblocks is going to do something that I just flat out disagree with. Like, we're doing it because I want to explore and experiment, and maybe we'll be surprised by something. But I am convinced that it's not that different from the issues that we dealt with early on in Artblocks, where an entire drop was minted out in literally 30 seconds. Like, nobody had the collecting experience back then either, and that was when there wasn't even bots involved, or if there were, it wasn't even that many. Like, people were getting mints. I also think 8 to 10 pieces per bot for 2 or 3 bots, that seems to rub people the wrong way pretty bad. To me, 170 out of 200 mints being able to be enjoyed by the collector, considering the implications of decentralization and considering the implications of trying to mess with decentralization, to me feels like a pretty decent ratio. And I see people really weigh in on these people that would mint 10 pieces over and over. I just want to clarify that I minted 14 ringers, right? I mean, granted, back then there wasn't as much competition, and I bought the things that I was just madly in love with. But there are people in this world that do actually just want to own a lot of them, and I think each of those, just like myself, have scaled back to just minting one to let more people have a chance. But I think it's human condition. It's human nature to want to collect more if you have the ability to get more. And there's new minting mechanics that we're going to do to make the situation better, hopefully, and to explore. And the allow listing, I think, for curated just makes me want to crawl into a hole, the idea that we would ever allow this to curated drop. But especially after all this talk about onboarding new people. But I think we will all do the best that we can, and we will continue to doing that. And if it ever looks like we're not doing the best that we can, we need to be called out for it, and I'm open for that.
Just so you know, I minted 16 ringers. I tweeted it today actually about ringers. It's funny that you brought that up, but I'll pass it off to my guests and co-hosts.
Yeah, and I also think it's kind of been healthy for the price action of a project like ringers to see a low concentration of owners, because like Eric said, there are a lot of people that genuinely do want to have a large set. It's just like collecting any other item. People sometimes like making sets and having a lot of stuff within a certain category. So it's just one observation.
Did you say people sometimes like collecting sets?
Sometimes.
Okay, just want to clarify that. No comment. Gee, I wonder. I guess it's really for you or Eric, whichever you has a preference for answering it. What's been something that in the several years that you've been in the space and doing all the various things that you've done that is a massive surprise to you? Something that was highly unpredictable, you couldn't see coming.
The rate of adoption, far and away. I remember when I bought my punk, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna hang out in Discord with my newfound internet friends, geeking out on this stuff, and the world will catch up in 4 to 5 years. And it took another 60 days, and everybody in the world knew what an NFT was at that point.
That was kind of your fault. It was some of your tweets out there were just so compelling, the digital flex and stuff. I kind of think that you might have been your own guilty of ruining that experience for yourself, but at the same time, you were so right, man, and you kind of nailed it.
I mean that, but all of that was from teachers like you, Vaughn, just hanging out in the Discord. It's funny. I was in a chat yesterday where we were talking about Nate Alex's Squiggly, right? And I was saying how that was the first project where I swept the floor, and then somebody literally went back in the Discord and they found my first post in there where I was like, how do I do this? I'm a noob here, right? And it's just all you guys taking the time to like educate me, right? And it's just like me then taking that education and then putting it in a way that I think ultimately like a lot of people started to understand.
My quick answer to that is the price of Chromie Squiggles continues to just baffle me. I'm super proud of it, but it's just insane to think about.
I mean, does it really baffle you though? Like, I mean, you in light of like what the whole long form generative art movement. I mean, you created a new class of art, and this was the first iteration of it. And not only are you the plot, did you create Artblocks? That's your first project. I mean, I don't know. It's becoming more or less the banner of generative art. I mean, I'm at this point, I'm not surprised anymore, and I wouldn't be surprised to keep seeing it go up. I'm not asking you to speculate on price. I know you don't like doing that, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not that surprised anymore.
I think the thing to consider here is that I spent, even to this day, more time thinking about the Chromie Squiggle and Artblocks than the amount of times that Artblocks has existed. And so, yeah, I mean, literally leading up to that, leaving an open edition of 10,000 because I was like, who the hell is going to buy this thing? To what it is today is just completely, it's just completely the opposite of what I expected to happen. And 4 years ideating a platform and trying to come up with ideas and reaching out to artists. And I texted Chettle the other day. I found an old Instagram message that I sent him in 2018. Like, just really, it was just this hobby. It was just a hobby. It was a really nerdy niche hobby, and then what's happened since then, it just still feels unbelievable every single day.
I have one more thing to add on this. And I just want to say, like, Eric, you hit on this before. You're talking about the CryptoPunks Discord and stuff like that. And, how all of us was just nerding out talking about CryptoPunks, and none of us thought they were going to 1000x or whatever that they did. But I just want to say that, you being such a key member of that group and being so open and honest with your time and your knowledge, like, really gave a lot of people a lot of confidence to follow you when you started Artblocks, and changed a lot of lives. And I mean, I know you hear this all the time, but really appreciative of how honest and sincere and generous you were with your time, and really helped people like me and many other people to understand the vision and ultimately have more or less a life-changing experience as a result of being involved with Artblocks. So just want to say I really appreciate everything, obviously.
Well, I appreciate you too, and all the people that have come since, and supporting and collecting and wanting to have this conversation is pretty important and meaningful. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, Eric's great. For anybody that hasn't had the pleasure to meet him, I mean, he's really just the most genuine and warm-hearted creature maybe I've ever met on the face of the earth, which is kind of insane to say, but he really is. I remember the first time I ever went to a generative art related event. It was at the Digital in Miami, and I was with some people. Couldn't have been more than a group of 6 or 8 of us, and we were all going to go and just like grab a beer, or maybe like grab a bottle of wine and share a glass of wine together or something like that. And I had never been introduced to Eric. I'm pretty sure he had no idea who I was. And he just went up to me. He's like, "Hey, man, do you want anything to drink?" And I just was like sort of floored because I sort of saw him as this enigma. And he's like the same guy no matter who you are. And I think that story spells to who Eric is, like, better than any other one. So thanks, man. You're the best.
Yeah, I think I was there that night in Miami. It was pretty hilarious. I think I didn't think it was possible, but I think he was like super stoked when he found out that I was like the guy with the cowboy hat in the Discord. And I think like it kind of speaks to like a greater point of just like identifying people in this space that like are genuine and have like, the right intentions, and really just making sure you align yourselves with them. I think like that's like a really important just principle to have, not only when you're thinking about collecting from certain artists or doing business with certain people, but I think like he certainly checks all those boxes, like you guys just said.
Yeah, I have no idea like what being an art collector was like 50 or 75 years ago or even longer, but like that whole like story about, coming for just seeing like if there's money to be made in this space, to like staying for the art or whatever, is like so real, right? I'm like the perfect example of it. And it's hard to imagine like any other outcome now. So I don't know like what people were doing back then, but man, I hope they have as much fun as I did, stumbling up onto this space for sure.
This is the most fun I've ever had in my life. I hope similar people can feel that way. It's just been really crazy the last few years, and it's people like you guys that make it so special. So yeah, thanks y'all.
Well, it's really cool that we have this opportunity to like actually interact with artists that we're collecting from. Like when I was buying art before I found out about generative, you might go through a gallery and you may get to like grab a drink with the artist if you fork over enough money to buy one of their paintings or pieces or whatever it is. But like here, like you actually get a chance to, interact with these artists and get to know them before buying the work. You don't have to go through some gallery or something, which I think like is a really powerful part of what draws me into this space as well.
Yeah, dude, Dimitri, you would go in the Dimitri channel and Artblocks back in the day, and you would just like ask a couple questions, and within like an hour, like 5 people and the artist would respond. Sometimes with like spreadsheets and breakdowns of like rarity rankings, like, oh yeah, you should check this out, and you should run the generator and do this and do that, and it was just like such a foreign concept, right? I mean, if you tried to call Pacer Gagosian or some gallery, I mean, you get transferred 4 times before anybody would even answer the phone. I mean, it's kind of insane.
It is a little interesting though. I'm curious to get like everyone else's thoughts on this. Is we are starting to see that model creep in a little bit into this space as demand for certain artists' work becomes, gets larger. Like there's now galleries that are sort of representing and doing drops where you have to go through the gallery to get a certain one of one from an artist. And I'm wondering, like, I mean, from one standpoint, it's good that you want the right collectors to be getting your work. That's good for the artist, but you also don't want to creep too far into that territory of, going back to the same problems that kind of make giving the traditional art world so much friction. So I'm curious to hear where people stand on that spectrum.
I mean, that's basically an allow list, right? So it's not, I mean, that's kind of what the issue is, but I think that there's a happy medium to be reached in between. I was on a call the other day with someone that said, what other time in history can anybody just wake up one day and make art and make money on it? And I'm like, well, that is going to become harder and harder as time goes by because someone has to discover that art because Twitter is becoming a complete shit show. And I'd say that less individual artists break out every year after year that I've been in this space. And so artists need mentorship. They need someone to help them understand how to value their art, how to talk about their art. And so I think that there's a happy place for it. But I mean, working, for example, with Venus Over Manhattan has been a pure joy. But there's also been a lot of like very hard conversations, like where, what is the value to each of it? Not just to me, like what is the value to you, to your gallery, your reputation that you built over the last few years? And I think that ultimately what's going to be so valuable is going to be the transparency factor of this, because you can allow list all day long, but then at the end, you'll see who won the allow list, I guess, unless you do like an anonymous wallet. And so I think there's a certain level of being able to hold people accountable after the fact. And I think that's just really important here. And whereas with the traditional art gallery, you might never know. I mean, you might never have walked into the gallery for fear of being, looked down upon or them being snooty. Whereas now, like, it's an open ecosystem and there's some accountability that comes after that. So I think it's a win-win, but it's definitely not going to be, crypto art is not going to disrupt the art world entirely. And the art world is definitely interested and curious and trying to find their way in. And the ones that are embracing it and willing to negotiate with artists and work with them and understand, what's the difference between me selling 300 squiggles through Venus versus unpausing the squiggle minter? I assure you I would have sold squiggles for more money if I unpaused the squiggle minter than if I did it, kind of in the slower way up. But, or I personally would have made more money, I guess. But like, that's not the point. The point is, trying to find new markets, trying to find new people. And they bring frankly, a collector that's less likely to sell your artwork in the next year than the crypto space does. So I think there's a happy medium to be found there. I don't think we found the medium yet. It's going to be found and it's going to be great.
Is your opinion that hybrid incentivization structures that may or may not include things like allow lists are the way to go? I mean, you've got like, collectors now that own mountains of Artblocks pieces and presumably would really like to continue owning more in the future. I mean, I'm assuming like, you've thought a lot about, how do you retain those people and reward them for being early participants while at the same time not neglecting new buyers, new onboards, people that want to have a chance to like participate in this ecosystem, right? I mean, unless we're going to open these things up to open editions, which I know is the contentious topic of the week, there's going to have to be some tough decisions made there.
Do y'all remember when Meebits came out and there was a lot of frustration? Wait, was it Meebits? No, it was, I think, the Protoglyph, where people were like, oh, Autoglyph's owners should have had access to that. And maybe so, it's the Protoglyph, like the one that became the glyph, or maybe people that had a whole set of Autoglyphs. And like, I don't know, like when people first say that, they say it's so charged, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, I have a bunch of glyphs. I should. And then I was like, no, like I think there's, I think there are ways to reward the people that are deep participants in the space, but I think a lot of those are just like treating people to something that didn't really have before, and to create an experience that didn't exist before. And I think that we just have to be so careful because like I don't want to create an SEC situation at Artblocks, and we will do everything to go out of our way to make sure that we're never promising future value on anything that we're doing. And the opposite of that is when you start rewarding. If you reward by coincidence or by surprise in the same way that we rewarded with the friendship bracelets, or like I'm pretty proud of like the way that we did the allow listing for the squiggle mints with Venus, in that I wasn't direct about, hey, send an email and you're going to get on this list. Like there was a very methodical process to making that something where I felt strongly that at least one time in my life I'll get away with that, getting a bunch of people. And so I to like order multiple mints or whatever. And so I think that there's like beauty here in trying to be creative in ways of rewarding people that are interested in the space. It's really early. We're only 2 years in, and generally, I think like systems will be established over time that help reward stuff. Whether it's you get points that you can exchange for like prints or something at the very minimum, something that could be a lighter lift, and then over time as regulation, like there's more clarity on regulatory stuff. Maybe there's other ways to promise a little bit more future value, but it's just a really hard balance. And in the meantime, there's a Dutch auction system, which while it hurts sometimes, and I can say that as a user, as the CEO of Artblocks, as an artist that's dealt with that, it hurts. But like as someone that participates in these systems often, I still come off of them feeling like this is the fairest way to let the people with conviction to participate, and almost like a guaranteed way. And I've paid well over 1 ETH higher than resting on multiple Dutch auctions because I was sure that I wanted that piece. I don't plan on selling it in the next however long. Like it was a play that gave me plenty of conviction. And then the other side is there's so many drops all the time. It's also kind of just migrating from this feeling that like I have to have every Artblocks, which I still haven't weaned myself off from. But I have now established the things in Artblocks that I like more than others. And I think that I should lean into the type of art. There's no way that you could like every single piece of artwork. Some of them speak to flowers. Some of them have figurative elements. Some of them have sunsets and mountains. Like there's no way that like every single one of them should appeal to every person. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really hard question. We definitely want to reward people for being active participants in our space. It feels like the easiest way to reward that right now is with the meaningful in-person experience, which is my favorite part of this thing. To the point of the vellum drop, like I came after it was done. There was still 50 people there, and I got to give 50 people a hug and say hello and like connect after a few weeks, which is crazy of not seeing them because I feel like I see you guys so often. But yeah, I feel like there's going to be different ways of reward mechanisms that get put in place. And for now, anything that even kind of tiptoes along the lines of something that can be considered a security or a promise of future value, or even just incite speculation. I remember when Gen.art came out, and like their big like first tweet was like, here's all the things Artblocks is doing wrong. They didn't say that specifically, but they're like, this is what we're going to do. And then they had these mint passes, and everybody got really excited about these mint passes. But to me, like a mint pass feels just very wrong. It has always just felt like not the right way to onboard more people, and to not add a second speculative layer on top of an already speculative blockchain and speculative artwork and speculative platform. And so, I think that there's certain things that we can do that feel clean, but they take time to figure out. They're going to be creative driven. And then there's things that we will probably end up doing in the future once there's a bit more regulation or clarity on regulation, and also just understanding what people's sentiment is. And when we feel like we've had enough people that participate in the platform, I think like a luxury car brand probably reaches some kind of homeostasis where they're like, hey, we get more orders than the amount of cars we release. And they don't necessarily have to worry about always wanting to let new artists have a place. Whereas with Artblocks, we always want to let new artists have a place. So we can't ever just kind of cut off the way that we cut off the luxury goods in other markets. And so there's just going to be a lot of creativity that's going to go into trying to balance making people feel rewarded, but at the same time, not closing off new entrants, which I think literally right now is the most important thing existentially for not necessarily for the really high value NFTs that are already out there, but for the survival of like cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology as a mainstream thing. So yeah, it's just there's always a lot to balance there, and I feel like a lot of people have really good ideas, but every single great idea I've heard comes with like 49% good idea, 51% like, oh shit, what about this? What's this attack vector? I still haven't quite felt the 51-49 in the other direction, much less anything more meaningful than that. I feel like if we're going to make an action, it should be like 75% guaranteed to be goodwill or successful, or we're kind of treading we're just kind of walking a fine line.
Okay. Thank you for that. The question this is for Eric and for Gmoney. Last week we had Ariel on from Pace Gallery. We were talking about, the Pace Gallery collab where you're taking traditional artists and pairing them with a creative coder, and then getting into, what makes a top tier generative artist? Do they have to code it themselves, or is it okay? Or what are the trade-offs? Maybe we get art that's of a higher quality because we're pulling in more artists, but there's a trade-off. They're not coding it. I'm just kind of wondering both what Eric and Gmoney, what you think in terms of from a generative drop, how much more important, or is it more important that the person who does the art also codes it, or can art that's coded by someone else be at the highest level of gen art?
I mean, I have my opinion on it. Eric, do you want to go first, or?
I mean, I'll just say that I like anyone that codes their own art is going to have a special place in my heart because this is where I come from and this is my like kind of my hobby. But I also just really like really good fucking art, and so if we can get really good art out there, there's pros and cons to everything. There's like every single thing that we do in the space has like its positive and negatives, and so I don't necessarily see a ghost coder being a negative thing, although I really value when that ghost coder is mentioned and acknowledged for their work. I think that's incredibly valuable. That props up the generative art medium. And so to me, it's a very easy win for a non-generative artist that has creative ideas and some conceptual stuff that I think will really kind of make an impact, not just in the Artblocks platform, but to the collectors, to acknowledge the person that created the artwork and even interact with them. Like, I think it'd be really wonderful for them to come onto a spaces with the artist, right, and talk about that relationship, because how many I literally get hundreds of inbound a month of people like, hey, I have a really good art project, I just need a coder. And I'm like, yeah, we don't put you in touch with a coder at this point. First of all, it's just getting a coder, which is also an artist, to bring to life a concept of an artist is very, very, very hard to do. But when it does work, it's beautiful. And I think that conversation should not just be buried, but that conversation should actually be brought to the forefront. Of course, if somebody is coding their own art and they create something magical, that will always have like that special place in my heart for it. But I just think it's, as we get, it's like 90cc, for example, like they weren't going to make, I mean, I guess they could come up with an algorithm, but I was honored and flattered to have the opportunity to bring my art to their platform. And instead of just kind of like saying, oh yeah, we created, I mean, of course it wouldn't have been a straight squiggle, maybe it would have been something different. But instead of saying, oh yeah, we created this algorithm, they brought in artists, they took advantage of synergies that come from elevating both. And I think there's a really big opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Eric just said is, I think that personally, like, I think it's super valuable and great to have, a coder who's an artist in his own right, and somebody with a creative vision come together and work on things, right? And I've been seeing that also, with the stuff that I'm doing on 90cc. And also, like, when you think about it in terms of like, AI and all these tools that are coming down the pipeline of, I think at some point in the very near future, like you're going to be doing a lot of no code in like everything, whether it's art or generative art or anything in the creative process, as well as like productivity gains and all that. So I think this is just like one variation of that. Like, I think one of the interesting things is being able to highlight that person that you're working with, And I think that that's one of the things that like I've been trying to do with 90cc as well, is like kind of use my platform to elevate the creatives that I'm working with, and also like put things that I wouldn't be able to accomplish on my own out into the real world. So I think like when somebody with a creative idea teams up with somebody else that can help them execute, I think like I wouldn't say that that is not as valuable because they weren't able to do it all on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think my view is that I don't think the market's going to necessarily differentiate in the short term. I think that people will appreciate the art for the art. I'm just like, for some of us that are hardcore purists, like people on this panel and our guests, I agree with Eric that the coder who is also the artist and puts out something spectacular is going to always be on the very top echelon. But I don't necessarily think the market will differentiate from a pricing standpoint.
All right, we're gonna try to take a few audience questions and wrap this up. So if you have one, please no shilling. Would appreciate it. Just go ahead and try to pop up on stage, or if you want to add one to the comments, I'll try to look through them. In the meantime, while we're running through a few of those, Eric and G, I'll shoot another one your way. If you could go back to the days of like the OG CryptoPunks discords where there's like less than 50 people hanging out in there every day, and even Eric in the early stages of Artblocks, I mean, I suspect I know the answer to this, but if you could change anything, would you? And if so, what would it be?
I can answer that pretty quickly and easily. I would have front run Von Mises on every trade and offer that he put out there on all the squiggles. That's what I would have done if I could change one thing from back then.
Too easy. Oh, man.
It was a good one. Very good.
It's amazing. I don't know that I would change much because I mean, I feel everything just kind of happened and fell in place for a reason. And I wouldn't change the $200 zombies I sold for paying for Artblocks development early on. I wouldn't change the $12,000 zombies and because the discourse around it was so much fun. I mean, it was crazy to be able to like show someone a slab of concrete and be like, yeah, that zombie paid for it, Pranksy or Seed Phrase or whoever did that. We had just the right amount of people entering with bad intentions and also just bad sentiment that were then converted into like positive contributors to the place. And I don't know, I guess my thing I would change is I would have bought vault.eth from Cry a lot earlier in the process. Now I feel like that would have been just a gem, and I don't think he wanted more than like one ETH for it, but maybe more, I don't know. But back then ENS domains weren't going for as much.
All right. 2009, I went ahead and brought you on stage. Did you have a question for anyone up on
Yeah,
top?
hi everyone. Really interesting conversation. Enjoyed listening, so thank you very much for that. Eric, just a question for Eric. Eric, are you familiar with Decagon's Golded's Decagons?
Oh yeah, very
Yeah,
familiar. Beautiful.
yes. And it just made me something you said, and I wouldn't mind your feedback on this. I think that might be the nut that might have been cracked because, from my experience, for anybody that's in the audience not that doesn't know Decagons and Deca art, to level up each generative piece, you gain DXP, which is gained by you don't buy it; it's not a coin by viewing art and reflecting on art and different pieces of art. And that allows you then to upgrade your Decagon. And the Decagon, I believe it is about right now, at one time it was free and now it's about $10 given the price of ETH. So it's relatively free, could be gifted. So my question to you is, do you think that's maybe a vehicle for this nut to be cracked of onboarding? I find it really has been for myself. I wouldn't mind your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's incredible, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It is probably 5 steps of complexity and hurdles more than I think the nut that I'm trying to crack necessarily with like the mainstream. I dug into it. I read all about it. I haven't participated in the Decagon mainly just out of a bandwidth level, and I just think everything Deca's done is incredible, and I'm just really proud that they're in this ecosystem. But I do very much think that within our space, within the already active participants, the people that are savvy with wallets and savvy with like understanding collecting art. I do think it might have cracked that nut, and it's one of the most beautiful things on my timeline right now is seeing the Decagons upgraded, and I'm just trying to think a little bit more towards like more mainstream adoption. But you're absolutely right there. I mean, it is a wonderful demonstration of what that means.
Does that mean that we're going to see a little bit more, at least within the Artblocks ecosystem, built around physical objects matching with the NFTs, experiences, a bit of both, some stuff that has yet to be announced? Can you give us a little bit of insight there?
I would like to dig into the ephemeral physical beyond just what friendship bracelets are. Like that's just one example of what I consider to be an ephemeral physical. And then, yeah, as we kind of strengthen our marketing strategy and understand more what it means to be in this space, more than just like a fly by the seat of our pants, oh, yeah, every conference, let's go do this thing. I think we will have more meaningful experiences for everyone involved. And we're excited to see what comes of that.
What do you guys think is likely to be the next major, I guess, market for generative or algorithmically produced anything, not just necessarily art, like G with 90cc and clothing? I mean, is it going to be furniture? Is it going to be something entirely different? I mean, in your opinion, what's the most likely next move?
I mean, my bet is obviously, I think on fashion, right? And I think on the physical side of things, and I think a lot of it is just the physical production capabilities catching up to the human imagination, and that to me is where I get really excited about the use of the tech in the real world.
Yeah, I agree. I think fashion is going to be other than printing posters at IKEA, which I still think is like the lowest friction, I think fashion or not just like high fashion, but apparel will very much be that. If I could custom embroider squiggles in place of a polo logo on shirts, like I feel like that's something that would be just an easy win in terms of variability. But the manufacturing capabilities have just not quite caught up yet, and I think we're still a ways out for that to be mainstream.
Yeah, I think G touched on a good thing that I think about a lot is just the tech not quite catching up to what we have. And that especially applies to dynamic art. Like, I think that's one thing that really drew me in to generative art, because forever we've never been able to go up and touch art or interact with it or manipulate it. Now we can. We just don't quite have the displays that have made it seamless to do so. I think like the best ones we have are still $35,000, but I think over time we'll start to see like the tech catch up to all these amazing ideas that are being spun up.
I think I saw some ones that were like quite reasonably priced, or at least that's the plan. When I went to Pace, shame we don't have Ariel on here to talk about it, but I think that stuff is closer than we think. Although it'd be awesome to see some of like Zach Lieberman's Lightworks on that Samsung screen. Maybe this year, we'll see. It'd be awesome. If there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap up unless anybody has some closing thoughts.
The only thing I want to say is I really want to thank our two guests for coming today. A lot of respect for both you guys, and really pleased that you're able to join us today and help make this space really, really great today. So really appreciate it, Gmoney and Eric. Thank you very much for coming today.
Any opportunity to do something with Gmoney is always exciting for me. Thanks, G, for being my partner in this, and for you guys for inspiring this conversation. I think it's great, and I think we can never have enough of this. Like, we can never have enough of this kind of conversation, and this isn't the kind of conversation you prep notes for. This is just like real, stream of consciousness stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate with you guys.
Yeah, I just want to go out and give away some of my friendship bracelets now. Onboard some more people. Let's go.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time and having us on. Really awesome convo, and hope to do it again sometime soon.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming in, tuning in, and we'll look forward to the next episode. We will include that in a follow-up tweet, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day.